December 22, 1299, witnessed an extraordinary spectacle unfold in Syria's Wadi al-Khaznadar. Mongolian archers stood shoulder to shoulder with Armenian Crusader knights, while Georgian cavalry fought alongside Turkish warriors. This eclectic coalition was led by Ghazan Khan, a Mongol emperor who had converted to Islam just 4 years prior. Their adversaries? The Mamluk army, also Muslim. This event represents one of history's most peculiar paradoxes. The very Mongols who had once devastated Baghdad and massacred hundreds of thousands of Muslims had unexpectedly transformed into the last hope for the Crusades. But was this a genuine salvation, or merely the dying gasp of a faded dream? Please leave your comments and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I'm keen to understand the global reach of our historical community. To grasp the profound significance of this battle, we must rewind 39 years to another conflict that irrevocably shifted the power dynamics across the Middle East. On September 3, 1260, in the Ain Jalut Valley of Palestine, imagine yourself as a Mongol warrior under the command of General Kitbuka. For the past 2 decades, you've witnessed your empire conquer everything from China to Poland. You saw Baghdad, the greatest city of Islam, consumed by flames. The concept of defeat was virtually absent from the Mongol lexicon, yet today, the impossible was set to occur. Sultan Qutuz of the Egyptian Mamluks had achieved something no one else had dared. He executed Hulagu Khan's envoys and displayed their heads on the gates of Cairo. This was a direct declaration of war. Now, 20,000 elite Mamluk horsemen faced a Mongol force numbering only 10,000 to 20,000 troops. Why such a small contingent? Because Hulagu Khan had been compelled to recall the vast majority of his army to Mongolia following the death of the great Khan monk. Imperial politics overshadowed military conquests. Kitbuka, an astute Nestorian Christian general of name and origin, was tasked with maintaining control over the conquered territories. The battle raged fiercely. The Mamluk general Baibars employed the very tactic the Mongols had perfected to defeat countless enemies. A feigned retreat designed to ensnare the foe. This time, it turned against the Mongols themselves. As victory began to favor the Mamluks, Sultan Qutuz reportedly cast off his helmet, exclaiming, "Wa Islama, O my Islam," and charged into the fray. Mamluk morale soared. Kitbuka fought to his last breath. Captured, he told Qutuz, "If I die at your hand, I will consider it God's will, not yours." Do not deceive yourself with this victory for a moment. When news of my death reaches Hulagu Khan, the ocean of his wrath will boil, and from Azerbaijan to the gates of Egypt, the earth will tremble under Mongol hooves. Yet, this prophecy never materialized. Kitbuka was executed, the Mongol army was routed, and for the first time in history, the Mongol Empire suffered a decisive defeat in open battle. Ain Jalut not only saved Egypt, but also the entire Islamic world from Baghdad's fate. Moreover, it propelled the Mamluks into the dominant power in the Middle East and the sworn enemy of the fading Crusader states. This placed the Christian kingdoms of the Middle East in a precarious position. To understand why, we must consider a small yet incredibly vital kingdom. Imagine being the ruler of a small nation caught between 2 warring superpowers. What would you do? This was the predicament of the Armenian Kingdom of Cilicia, a Christian state on the Mediterranean coast in what is now southern Turkey. In 1247, King Hethum I made a bold and controversial decision. He voluntarily submitted to the Mongol Empire. Not because he admired the Mongols, but because he understood the realities of power. Hethum undertook an astonishing journey from Cilicia, across Central Asia, all the way to Karakorum, the Mongol capital. Consider this: a Christian king traveling thousands of miles through deserts and mountains to meet the great Khan monk. This was not the act of a coward, it was the strategic move of a pragmatic statesman. And the strategy paid off. When the Mongols attacked Baghdad in 1258, Armenian forces fought alongside them. When the Mongols captured Damascus in 1260, the Armenians were there. In return, the Mongols protected Armenia from Mamluk and Seljuk assaults. However, everything changed after Ain Jalut. The Mamluks were now the dominant regional power, and they had not forgotten Armenia's alliance with the Mongols. In 1266, the Mamluk Sultan Baybars, the very general who had triumphed at Ain Jalut, devastated Armenia. Cities were destroyed and people massacred. Even Hetham's sons were killed or taken captive. To those who today criticize Hetham I's decision, I would suggest considering this. Without the Mongol alliance, Armenian Cilicia might have been entirely obliterated even sooner. There are times in history when no favorable options exist, only those that are less dire. By the close of the 10th century, Armenia found itself in a desperate situation. Mamluks pressed from the south, while Turks advanced from the west. The Mongols, their sole allies, were engulfed in internal disputes and clashes with other Mongol factions. Amidst this bleak period, a new prospect emerged, not from Europe, but from Persia, where a young Mongol ruler had recently embraced Islam and was preparing for a significant war. In 1295, Ghazan Khan, the great-grandson of Hulagu Khan, took a step that surprised everyone. He converted to Islam. Consider this for a moment. His great-grandfather had orchestrated the massacre of hundreds of thousands of Muslims in Baghdad. He had annihilated the House of Wisdom, a repository of Islamic knowledge, and killed Caliph al-Mustazim by wrapping him in a rug and ordering horses to trample him to death, as Mongol law forbade shedding the blood of monarchs. Now, his descendant was becoming a Muslim. Why? The answer isn't as straightforward as many believe. Ghazan was no fanatic. He was described as exceptionally intelligent, fluent in numerous languages: Mongolian, Persian, Arabic, Chinese, Tibetan, and even European Frankish. His interests lay in science, astronomy, and history. His conversion was partly a political maneuver, intended to gain the support of the Muslim military in his quest for the throne. However, a deeper motivation also existed. A large portion of his Ilkhanate populace followed Islam. To govern effectively, he needed to legitimize his authority in their eyes. Yet, here's the paradox. After converting to Islam, Ghazan did not cease warring with the Mamluks, who were also Muslims. Why? For Ghazan, this was not a religious conflict. It was about power. The Mamluks had defeated his great-grandfather at Ain Jalut. They had brought dishonor upon the Mongol Empire, and this was intolerable. Furthermore, Ghazan possessed a shrewd theological argument. In letters to the Mamluks, he claimed to be God's chosen instrument for purifying Islam from corruption. He accused the Mamluk sultans of tyranny and asserted that God had sent him, a Mongol, to restore justice. This was a compelling narrative and might have succeeded were it not for one obstacle. Ghazan needed allies, and the only allies willing to fight alongside him were the very Christians his ancestors had once protected. This explains why, in the summer of 1299, when Hetham II, grandson of Hetham the Fern, sent Ghazan a desperate plea, the Muslim and Mongol Emperor responded. And not merely responded, he assembled one of the most ethnically and religiously diverse armies in the history of the medieval Middle East. Imagine being a Syrian peasant in the autumn of 1299, witnessing this army march through your village. First, you'd see the Mongol cavalry, dark-skinned warriors with their formidable composite bows, riding small but hardy horses, numbering around 60,000. Next would come Georgian warriors from the Caucasus, Orthodox Christians in heavy armor with crosses on their shields, numbering up to 40,000. Following them, the Armenian Cilician forces under King Hetham II, 5,000 elite cavalry, also Christians, bearing a profound hatred for the Mamluks who had devastated their homeland. Scattered throughout, according to some disputed sources, were even some Templars and Hospitallers from Cyprus and Armenia. Ghazan Khan, the Islamicized Mongol emperor, commanded them all. They advanced south with a singular objective: to crush the Mamluks and reclaim Syria. But for the Christians in this coalition, there was a deeper motivation. They believed, or at least hoped, that by assisting the Mongols in defeating the Mamluks, Jerusalem might return to Christian control. This hope was not unfounded. Ghazan had promised in letters to Europe that if they helped him defeat the Mamluks, he would return Jerusalem to the Christians. This was a promise akin to those made by previous Mongol emperors, none of whom had fulfilled it. Yet, for Armenia, for the surviving Crusaders in Cyprus, For those who had witnessed the fall of Acre, the last Crusader city, in 1291, this was their final hope. Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, spent the years from 1299 to 1303 attempting to coordinate efforts with the Mongols. He tried to persuade European monarchs to dispatch troops and rallied the military orders. He even led a small fleet in 1300 to raid the Syrian coast, accompanied by a representative of Ghazan. But Europe had forgotten about the Holy Land. The era of the Crusades was over. European kings were preoccupied with their own conflicts, while the Templars and Hospitallers faced their own crises of legitimacy and finance. Therefore, in December 1299, when Ghazan Khan confronted the Mamluks at Wadi al-Khaznadar, his coalition primarily consisted of Mongols, Georgians, and Armenians. Western Crusaders were almost entirely absent, but those who were present were about to witness a remarkable victory. December 22, 1299, 5 a.m., near Homs, Syria. The pre-dawn darkness still clung to the sky as Mamluk Sultan al-Nasir Muhammad observed the Mongol coalition forces arraying themselves before him. He commanded roughly 20,000 to 30,000 Mamluk horsemen, the Middle East's premier fighters, the same individuals who had decisively defeated the Mongols at Ain Jalut 39 years prior. However, this time, the Mongols held a numerical advantage. More critically, this was Ghazan Khan's army, not the diminished remnants of Kitbuka's era. As dawn broke, the battle commenced. Adhering to their cavalry traditions, the Mamluks surged forward in a direct assault. This was a perilous maneuver against the Mongols, recognized masters of mounted warfare. Yet, the Mamluks possessed certain advantages. Their horses were larger, their armor more robust, and they were proficient in close-quarters combat. For the initial hours, the exchange appeared balanced. The Mongol troops employed their customary tactics, firing bows from a distance while in motion, diligently avoiding direct engagement. Nonetheless, the Mamluks relentlessly pressed their advance, pushing them back. Suddenly, the Mamluks' right flank, led by commanders Isa Beluana and Balaban Alabak, found itself under a devastating barrage of Mongol arrows. Hundreds of Mamluk warriors perished within moments, plunging the ranks into disarray. It was at this critical juncture that Ghazan signaled a counterattack. The Mongol heavy cavalry, less renowned than their archers but equally lethal, crashed into the weakened Mamluk flank. Georgian and Armenian forces joined the fray from the sides, and the battle dissolved into utter chaos. By midday, the Mamluk army's center began to waver. Reports of the Mongol breakthrough on the right flank spread, though in such a vast army stretched across the battlefield, such information could take hours to reach other units. By the time they comprehended the unfolding disaster, it was too late. Sultan al-Nasir Muhammad issued the command to retreat. It was the correct decision. To remain would have meant certain destruction. However, the retreat swiftly devolved into a panicked rout. Then, something remarkable occurred, revealing the intricate political landscape of the region. As the Mamluks fled south towards Damascus, they faced attacks not only from the Mongols, but also from 12,000 local Maronite and Druze archers. These were Syrian inhabitants, some Christian, others Muslim, but all nursing a deep-seated hatred for Egyptian Mamluk rule. They seized this opportunity for independence. The Mamluks were pursued all the way to Gaza. Damascus capitulated in late December or early January. A Mongol detachment under General Molay even conducted deep raids into Palestine. It was then that rumors began to circulate across Europe. Jerusalem liberated. The Holy Land returned to Christian hands. The Crusaders victorious. However, the truth was far more intricate. In early 1300, Europe buzzed with talk of the miraculous events in the Holy Land. Churches offered prayers of thanksgiving. Merchants envisioned renewed trade routes. Monarchs contemplated sending reinforcements. Yet, in Syria, the reality diverged significantly. Yes, the Mongols had captured Damascus, and yes, they had defeated the Mamluks, and indeed, some Mongol detachments had raided Palestine. But concerning Jerusalem, no one knew for certain. Some Armenian sources claimed King Hethum II had visited Jerusalem. However, no other accounts, neither European, Mamluk, nor even Mongol, corroborated this. It is most probable that Jerusalem was never truly occupied. At that time, it was a small, neglected town devoid of strategic value. The Mongols were interested in Damascus and Aleppo, cities with genuine economic and military importance. For Europeans, these intricacies were irrelevant. They desired to believe in the miracle, and for a few brief months, they did. Then, everything collapsed. In February 1300, Ghazan recalled the majority of his army back to Persia. Why? Some historians postulate that their horses required sustenance, and Assyria, ravaged by war, could not sustain such a massive army. Others suggest Ghazan received intelligence of an invasion from the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, necessitating the defense of his eastern borders. Whatever the reason, the outcome was the same. The Mongol army departed, leaving behind only a small force of approximately 10,000 men under General Mule. The Mamluks, under the leadership of capable commanders like Baibars al-Jashnagir, swiftly regrouped. In May 1300, they launched a counterattack. Mule's small detachment was unable to hold its ground and retreated. Damascus once again fell into Mamluk hands. The Armenian Hethum, too, had been counting on Ghazan's return. Ghazan had promised to come back in the winter of 1300 to 1301 to attack Egypt, but he never materialized. In 1301, the Mongols made another attempt, but adverse weather hampered their efforts. In 1303, they embarked on a final endeavor, this time with a formidable army of approximately 80,000 men, augmented by Armenian troops. This was intended to be the decisive assault. At Homs in March, and during the decisive Battle of Marj al-Safar near Damascus on April 21st, the Mongols suffered a significant defeat. This particular engagement was far from a close contest. The Mamluks, having learned from their previous experience at Wadi al-Khaznadar, were better prepared and achieved a resounding victory. This marked the final major Mongol incursion into Syria, and with the passing of Ghazan in May 1304, at the young age of 32, any prospects for a Mongol-Christian alliance perished alongside him. Meanwhile, Jacques de Molay and the Knights Templar endeavored to maintain a small foothold on Ruat Island, off the Syrian coast, clinging to the hope of a Mongol return. However, in 1302, the Mamluks besieged the island. Although the Templars fought bravely, they eventually surrendered under the promise of safe passage to Cyprus. This pledge, regrettably, was broken by the Mamluks, and the surviving knights were executed. Thus fell the last bastion of the Crusaders on the mainland of the Holy Land. Jerusalem would not see Christian rule again until 1917, when the British recaptured it from the Ottoman Empire. So, did the Mongols truly rescue the Crusaders? The answer hinges on one's definition of rescue. If you had posed this question to King Hethum I in December 1299, following their triumph at Wadi al-Khaznadar, he would likely have affirmed it. Armenia had reclaimed lost territories, the Mamluks were in disarray, and Jerusalem seemed almost within reach. However, had you asked him the same question in 1304, after the ultimate defeat, with the Mamluks having recovered all of Armenia's losses, Ghazan deceased, and all hope extinguished, his response would have been drastically different. The stark reality is that the Mongols did not ultimately save the crusading movement. They merely offered a fleeting glimmer of hope, a temporary success, a moment where possibilities seemed boundless. Ultimately, it merely postponed the inevitable. Yet, what remains striking is that during those brief periods in 1299 and 1300, when a diverse multinational and multi-ethnic force fought side by side, they demonstrated a crucial point. They revealed that in history, alliances often transcend the religious or cultural boundaries we typically envision. A Muslim Mongol emperor could align with Christian monarchs against Muslim sultans. Syrian Maronites and Druze could launch attacks on Egyptian Mamluk forces, despite sharing a common faith. This is because, in the end, the intricate dynamics of power politics are far more complex than the simplified narratives we tend to construct. Consider the difficult choices faced by these historical figures. King Hethum II, in 1247, had to choose between resisting the Mongols, which would lead to certain destruction, or submitting to them for a chance at survival. He opted for survival. Some might label this betrayal, others pragmatism. Regardless, it allowed Cilician Armenia to endure for centuries more. Ghazan, in 1295, faced the dilemma of maintaining his traditional religion and facing widespread opposition, or converting to Islam for more effective governance. He chose conversion. Did this diminish his Mongol identity, or did it simply demonstrate his wisdom as a ruler? Jacques de Molay, between 1299 and 1302, had to decide whether to continue hoping for a Mongol return, risking his knights' lives on Ruad Island, or to surrender and concede the Holy Land as lost. He chose hope. Did this directly lead to his demise? No, that would happen 5 years later at the hands of King Philip IV of France. But did it make him a fool, or perhaps the last individual who still believed in the dream? There are no simple answers to these inquiries, and that is precisely why this historical narrative holds significance. The Battle of Wadi al-Khaznadar was not a monumental victory that fundamentally altered the course of history. It did not salvage the Crusades, nor did it liberate Jerusalem. Within just a few years, all its gains were reversed. Nevertheless, it remains important for 3 key reasons. Firstly, it illustrates that history is not a straightforward dichotomy of us versus them, not simply Christian against Muslim or East against West. Instead, it is an intricate web of converging interests, shifting alliances, and difficult decisions made by real people in challenging circumstances. Secondly, it serves as a reminder that fleeting triumphs do not always translate into enduring success. Ghazan achieved victory at Wadi al-Khaznadar, but he was unable to consolidate that win. Why? Because strategy involves more than just winning battles. It requires the ability to retain what has been gained, the resources to sustain efforts, and dependable allies. Thirdly, and perhaps most crucially, it illuminates the nature of hope and self-deception. The Crusaders in Cyprus, the Knights Templar, and the Armenians all desperately wished to believe that the Mongols would be their saviors, and for one brief period, it seemed possible. However, hope predicated on the strength of others is fragile and can vanish without warning. Ultimately, the Crusades failed not due to a lack of military victories. They faltered because Europe lost the will to support them, because local kingdoms were too small and weak to stand independently, and because they placed their faith in a Mongol empire that was internally chaotic and incapable of allocating the necessary resources. This account isn't about betrayal, cowardice, or merely a military blunder. It delves into the calculations of power, and sometimes the numbers simply aren't in your favor, no matter how valiantly you fight. So, reflecting on this historical period 725 years ago, what insights can we glean? First, exercise caution when forming alliances based primarily on a shared adversary rather than common interests. The Mongolians and the Crusaders were bound solely by their antipathy towards the Mamluks, lacking any genuine alignment of objectives or values. When Ghazan decided his priorities lay elsewhere, the alliance dissolved. Second, in dire circumstances, individuals often make imperfect choices, which history then judges harshly. Hethum, Ghazan Khan, and Jacques de Molay all made potentially contentious decisions. However, their choices were made within the context of their time, with evolving information and confronting terrifying alternatives. It's simple to judge the past from a safe remove. Understanding it is far more complex. My third point, military success alone is insufficient. Political strategy, economic engagement, and the resolve to see things through are essential. The Battle of Wadi al-Khaznadar was a brilliant military triumph, but it failed to yield lasting outcomes because it lacked these crucial elements. Finally, fourth, history doesn't always conclude with a logical resolution. Sometimes the good guys lose. Occasionally, hopes are dashed, and even significant victories can prove fruitless. Yet, these narratives still warrant telling, as they illuminate the nature of human struggle, the intricacies of historical progression, and why straightforward solutions are rarely the correct ones. If you enjoyed this video and wish to explore more compelling historical accounts, hit the like button, subscribe, and activate notifications. And share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done as Hethum II in 1299? Would you have allied with the Mongols, hoping for a miracle? Or would you have acknowledged the end of the crusading era and sought peace with the Mamluks? There's no definitive answer, but I'd be keen to hear your perspective. Thank you for watching. See you next time.